The third question of Secunda Secundae of the Summa Theologia, as we continue in this treatise on the theological virtues, is very short. In fact, there's only 2 articles in this, so I think this is going to be a very short video, and it's pretty simple and straightforward, and it is on the outward act of faith. And what this means is, do we have an obligation to confess our faith, to make it public rather than keeping our faith inside us? And again, only 2 articles: whether confession of faith, whether confession is an act of faith, when you confess your faith. And we're not talking here about sacramental confession. He's talking about, like I said, making your faith public, making it known, talking to people about and letting it be known publicly. He says outward actions belong properly to the virtue to whose end they are specifically referred. Thus, and here's an example. He's good at giving examples. Fasting is referred specifically to the end of abstinence, which is to tame the flesh, and consequently it is an act of abstinence. And so we have to link the action to the virtue, right? Confession of those things that are of faith is referred specifically as to an end, and that which concerns faith. And then he quotes St. Paul and then says, for the outward utterance is intended to signify the inward thought. Now that's an important concept, okay? The actions that we have and the words we say especially have to do with an inward thought. That's why St. Thomas Aquinas came down saying every lie is a sin. Okay, even a white lie is a sin, he says, because we're saying something out, with words that don't match what's in our head, or in our thought, I guess you should say. Wherefore, just as the inward thought of matters of faith is properly an act of faith, so too is the outward confession of them. So yes, confession is an act of faith. And then the final, second article, whether confession of faith is necessary for salvation. Okay, do we have to do this? And he is, I'll just kind of summarize this. He's saying that under some circumstances, you don't have to go out all the time confessing your faith in every single opportunity. But he said under some circumstances, like if you were, let me read what he says. He says it's not necessary for salvation to confess one's faith at all times and in all places, but in certain places and in certain times, when, namely, by omitting to do so, we would deprive God of due honor, or our neighbor of a service that we ought to render him. Now that's very important. For instance, if a man, on being asked about his faith, were to remain silent so as to make people believe either that he is without faith or that his faith is false, or so as to turn others away from the faith, in such cases, confession of faith is necessary for salvation. So we can't bottle it up, but at the same time, we don't have to, constantly be talking to every single person we meet about our faith. All right, I told you this is going to be a short one, and that is it. And just 2 articles there on the outward act of faith. God bless you, and thanks for joining with me through the Summa Theologia.